Hello, I'm Cara Dahl Russell. And today I'm going to be talking about the life of Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky. And in particular, his Symphony No. 4. Right now we just heard a bit of his None But the Lonely Heart. That work, the waltzes from Eugene Onegin, the Sleeping Beauty score and the Sleeping Beauty waltz, the Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy, and the entire Nutcracker suite, all highly evocative, greatly varied works of extremely memorable melody, like this, the 1812 Overture. All the work of Tchaikovsky. There's a reason we can remember his tunes so readily. He and Chopin are perhaps the two best-known composers who regularly wrote in what is known as song form, AABA, or verse-verse, chorus-verse, or ABA-BA, verse-chorus, verse-chorus, verse. This form, combined with a hummable melody, makes works very memorable and makes works significantly more popular and often also much more profitable. Here's a bit of his Sleeping Beauty waltz. It's one of life's ironies that both of these composers, Chopin and Tchaikovsky, led very sad, troubled lives of ill health coupled with great inner turmoil. When I first presented this lecture, I was talking about several composers, and my through line was, does character matter? And there is a saying that character is what you do when no one is looking. And with that in mind, Tchaikovsky gives me plenty to talk about and a lot for us to think about. Now, I have to add a proviso here that in Russia, the fact that Tchaikovsky was gay is still greatly disputed by many authorities. However, it is generally understood by music historians through his own letters, through his diary entries, and through his interactions and letters with other people, that Tchaikovsky was gay. And he was gay at a time when it could mean, in many countries, an actual death sentence to be homosexual. So that would be enough reason for him to lead a covert and conflicted life. For some people, that would be seen as a practical necessity and not a tremendous source of concern. After all, this was a period when most married men had multiple affairs outside of marriage, like Wagner. But Tchaikovsky seems to have had a really terrible internal struggle, attempts at denial, depression, and intermittently a deep self-loathing. When we contrast this with the infectious beauty of his tune-filled music, it's infinitely sad. He grew up in an upper-middle-class family with 5 brothers and 1 sister. He began taking piano lessons at 4 and showed great talent, eventually eclipsing his teacher. Meanwhile, at 9, he was said to have severe nervous problems, and they were severe. Some biographers report severe migraines, and some make connections to a grandfather who had epilepsy. He had spells of extreme nerves and sensitivity, including uncontrollable weeping. He was so afraid of thunderstorms that even as an adult, he often had to hide in a closet. He was afraid of meeting people and also afraid of being alone. He ran away several times, thinking that he'd be less fearful in a new place. And even as a young conductor, he had an obsessive fear that his head would fall off while he conducted, to the point that he would hold his chin with one hand and conduct with the other. The solution his parents came up with was to send him away to school at age 10 to study jurisprudence. Hooray! Problem solved. To be fair, they didn't send him to military school. Even if they had considered music, they may have reasonably thought that he could never handle the nerves of being a performer. And this was a recurring problem for him. Nerves about his work, both during the process and fears of how it would be received. So, being a lawyer was probably a pretty good fit for a bookish, nervous boy in those days, and it would have been respectable. At 19, he took a post in the Ministry of Justice, and he used his money to attend all the concerts he could, and within 2 years, he used his savings to finance the beginning of his formal musical education. Within 3 years, he was studying at the St. Petersburg Conservatory. 5 years later, he was working on his first symphony and accepted a post at the newly created Moscow Conservatory. It's likely that the new job played on his nerves and heightened his anxiety about his new composition. He had a nervous breakdown during the work on this composition and went to a country retreat for the summer for a rest cure. The next fall, he returned to school and completed that first symphony. The symphony was not received well by his fellow teachers. In performance a few years later, however, it was a popular success. This became a bit of a pattern for Tchaikovsky. Critics found fault, while the public cheered. One of the ongoing criticisms of his work was the same thing that made his works popular, the song form. His work was considered best when it was episodic, allowing each episode to be built around one song theme. This is, of course, exceptionally well suited to ballet, which requires scenes of music with a strong emotion, followed by the next scene with a different emotion, and so on. This was, and still is, technically considered a flaw in symphonic construction. Symphonies are supposed to have a stronger integration and through line of extended development. We can contrast him with Wagner's great genius and technical achievement, the extremes to which he extended thematic development, sometimes taking 15 minutes to achieve the thematic resolution of one theme, and then extending and integrating that same theme over hours. This is also what makes some people find Wagner's work unbearably slow and excruciatingly attenuated. It's not an accident that Wagner's most popular and most frequently performed works are his overtures and preludes. They constitute a condensed form of the themes that bring Wagner's work a little closer to an accessible song form. So when you listen to this Symphony No. 4 of Tchaikovsky, you'll want to listen for the melodic, song-like developments in his symphony. The Fourth Symphony, which we're going to hear, was written during a specific time and a particularly turbulent part of his life, with great extremes of luck and support and his worst life choice. The good news: shortly before he began composing his symphony, Tchaikovsky received the kind of fan mail that every artist dreams of. An ardent admirer of his work sent him a really passionate mash note with a difference. A rich widow, Nadezhda von Meck, wanted to support his work financially, with a caveat that they never meet. For 13 years, they had a correspondence, including declarations of passionate love. I have a friend who works in the news media who jokes when he's referring to things that are said by politicians that some statements, quote, are not intended to be factually correct, unquote. I think we can safely say the same thing when you read the ardent words of passion from both sides of this love letter affair. The progeny of this affair was music, including the symphony we will hear tonight. The family tree that it gave us was the rarity of letters to von Meck in which Tchaikovsky wrote his notes about the inspirational thought process of his music. Usually, he insisted that his work was not programmatic. Only to von Meck, he wrote notes that revealed, if not a musical story, at least an emotional through line of many of his works. Of course, we also have to remember that he was always aware that she was a patron he wanted to please, and he may have written some of this solely to impress or to please her. The bad news. During the creation of this symphony, he made a devastatingly self-destructive decision. A former student of his, Antonia Milikova, also wrote him a fan letter begging to meet with him. She had an obsessive fangirl crush on Tchaikovsky and passionately pleaded to, quote, serve him all of her life, as, unquote, as his wife. This event dovetailed with Tchaikovsky's own thought that, quote, I am convinced that my inclinations are the greatest and insuperable barrier to my well-being, and I must by all means struggle against my own nature, unquote. So here was Antonia presenting herself at the time when he wrote to his brother, quote, from this day on, I will seriously consider matrimony with any woman, unquote. Hooray, problem solved. They got married. History has not been kind to Antonia. She is usually described as high-strung and emotionally unbalanced. But I think we have to revisit that, both in terms of the emancipation of women, in terms of her love for him, youthful and overwrought, and the fact that she wasn't living in a dream world. He did actually marry her. We know from his letters to von Meck that Tchaikovsky was capable of great verbal and written eloquence of protestations of love and passion. So imagine the magnitude of Antonia's disappointment when she found out, on her wedding night, that his love was all talk and no action. In these repressed times, she would have had to puzzle out for herself that her marriage was as much of a one-sided show as the scenery at the ballet. Tchaikovsky wrote to his brother that the first time they were alone together, he, quote, wanted to scream, unquote. After a few weeks of marriage, Tchaikovsky tried to kill himself in the icy river, but only succeeded in getting pneumonia, then went to live with his brother, Modeste. He never saw Antonia again. People don't change. The times change, the situations change, but people are people. As with any nasty, high-profile divorce made public, Antonia tried to get friends and family on her side and eventually threatened to destroy him. While historians accuse her of trying to extort money from him, we have to remember that in this day and age, women couldn't work. Financial support was expected as part of the marriage. For any woman of her day, all of these elements would have been crazy-making. Fortunately for Tchaikovsky, the laws worked very well for men. In 1896, she was confined to an insane asylum where she spent the last 20 years of her life. Hooray, problem solved. I'm still thinking about what are the ramifications of this episode and where it puts Tchaikovsky in relationship to Wagner in terms of how each of them treated the people in their lives. So at the time of writing this symphony, Tchaikovsky was in the midst of the height of both of these relationships, heaven and hell. Sometimes we go very wrong by reading biography into a work of art, but certainly the extremes going on in his life match the overall thoughts he had on this work. In his description of this Fourth Symphony, we see both his fatalism and his desire to live in blissful dreams of denial. I will close with excerpts of what he wrote about this symphony to von Meck. Quote, "This is destiny, the fatal power which prevents an impetus towards happiness from reaching its goal, which jealously watches that peace and comfort be not full and cloudless. It is better to turn from the realities and to lull oneself in dreams. Oh, joy! What a tender dream! The first theme of the Allegro is now heard far off, and now the soul is wholly enwrapped with dreams. All that is gloomy is now forgotten. Happiness! Happiness! No, they are only dreams, and fate dispels them." Unquote. The thoughts and the music of Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky.